In this lesson, we'll be modeling the upper walls and windows using the existing geometry that we already have on our ground floor. Now, this is a technique where you can save a lot of time by cutting a lot of corners by basically just repeating everything that you possibly can in one big batch. So there are certain elements that will not necessarily be copied, but will rather be extended from the lower floor. And one of those areas in particular is the central tower, which pretty much has this wall running from the ground all the way up to the roof in one straight shot. And we also have this glazing that is similarly going vertically running all the way up. So in this case, instead of copying the object and having a duplicate above and below, we're rather going to go down in the modifier list and then edit that object so that we can actually have it extending vertically upwards. So I'm going to go and select all the top edges, just deselecting, or at least using rather the window method of selection. And I'm going to hold down Shift and drag those edges upwards, and then manually typing in 6.25, which is the height of the top of the floor slab. So 6.25 in there. And then repeating that again until I can create the full height of that tower based upon my CAD information. So here I'm busy stretching it out, and I can see just from lining it up that the top is going to be 10.9 meters high. Then I can go and add in other horizontals. For example, this is a doorway, or at least a threshold between all the levels. So you would want to go and add that horizontal in, and you can basically just cut it in by adding an extra edge into that. So we're going to connect that in, and then you're going to look in your side views and basically just get that height to be where it should be according to your particular plan. Then you can go ahead and delete those areas. And once you go to the top level of your object, everything will pop back into 3D thanks to your shell modifier, and there you go, your wall is done. Here you can also delete this portion. You don't need these two small parts. And at the same time, you can go and delete the two underneath, since they are actually the walkways on the lower levels. So all of this acts as one giant wall. You don't need to go and copy anything. The beauty of it is that you can work with a much larger object as a single editable poly, instead of having a separate wall at the bottom, separate wall on top, perhaps two separate walls on both sides. All of that starts to really complicate your model, and as soon as you start to merge everything into one single editable poly, you will see that you will speed up your workflow a lot. Same thing happens to your window frame. Instead of copying it upwards, go down into your editable poly, select your sub-object, or at least all of the polys, drag it up vertically, create it as an internal object within that same object. In other words, the polys are not going to be made into a separate object. And here I'm just doing this by eye, but you can of course snap everything and align everything to the exact heights. But here you would basically just continue by making an additional window frame. So the same process would then happen to your glass. You could then go and bridge these small edges together to basically make a small frame here. And just to let you know why I've done it this way, if you have a look at your building, you'll see that you have the framing running at this height, and I basically want to continue that horizontal line at this level, and where the frames will start on the upper level, I want to continue that level here. So that is why I'm making this little double frame, which will have a very narrow window running through it. So all of these little details I'm going to do off screen, so you don't have to watch me laboriously doing this in front of you. And just before I get into this part of the building, I'd like to do the same thing that we had done earlier to this part as well. So I'm going to just quickly drag this upwards so that we get an idea of what this part of the building is looking like. So this will be 6.25 again, just like we'd done before, and repeating the entire process, we're going to drag that upwards. This is going to be 10.4 meters. And same thing here, we have windows cut in on the side, and that's just going to be done exactly the way we had done these here. Now we get to the part where we can start to copy things vertically. And what I mean by that is that we have a whole lot of internal doors, internal walls, and between the upper and lower level of this block in particular, it is almost a direct copy of each other. So basically these are 4 bedrooms, 2 on top of 2, and we can take advantage of that by just copying everything and moving it vertically. So the one thing that we're not going to copy, just to basically refine our selection, is these vertical shutters over here. They're going to be single elements that are actually going to run past the slab. So that means that the slab needs to be shifted back in, and only this slab at the bottom will be protruding out slightly. So these are going to be very long elements running all the way up to the top, and they may even be supported halfway by something, but basically we want to read that verticality, and that's part of the design intention that you can see over here, where you can see that line running all the way through. Exactly the same thing happens if we look at the side view. We see that the screen is running past the slab, which means that we need to tweak this slab edge by pushing it in slightly so that we can actually see these screens running past. So all of those tiny little tweaks I'm going to do, and those tweaks are simply done by looking at the editable spline and just moving that editable spline in. It may need to be refined slightly by adding more vertices into it, but in most cases you can just move that back like so, or even just to this point here, and then after you release it, it will basically reveal the screen that can then move past it. So the screen itself is just a simple editable spline object. We went and modeled it a few lessons ago, and that would then be simply moved up like so. And you can pretty much start to get an idea of how the modeling is happening, where you're just taking objects that you already have, we're extending them, we're copying sub-objects of them. So the same process here is repeated. What we don't do is we don't copy the object one on top of the other, because if you do have to make a change, then you would have to make a change to 2 objects all of a sudden instead of just 1. Whereas now I just have a single sweep parameter, and I can go and increase the length and the width or do anything I want to that parameter, and the whole thing changes as one. And that is the real beauty. And you will also notice that the size, or at least the sweep parameter here, is instanced to this one over here, which means that any changes I make are going to happen globally, because that is pretty much what would happen in a real scenario where you would have one type of wood thickness being used in similar areas around the building, and when you make a change, you want to make sure that it is affected globally. So anyway, let's turn off our screens now that we know that they're moving vertically straight upwards. And let's go and select all the objects that are going to be copied. So namely, let's just select all of that. And you'll see that already we have a pretty much good selection of everything. That means we're selecting all of the windows, we're selecting all of the internal doors and walls as well. And we can also include this entire window as well. So all of those objects are going to be copied vertically. So let's now go and type Ctrl-V on our keyboards, make a copy. The reason why I'm making a copy and not an instance is because it's not always the case where your floor-to-floor height will be identical between the 2 levels. Once you copy it to the top level, you may want to make changes to certain things that you don't want to have instanced and reflected downstairs. So that's why it may be safer to use a copy. If you're doing a big high-rise building and you're certain that the floors are all going to be identical, then by all means go and do an instance, and then just repeat that instance all the way up the height of your building. In any case, I'm going to leave it as a copy, and I'm now going to move it upwards by 3.8 meters, which is the floor-to-floor height of our building. So you'll see that everything just snaps onto the top of the floor slab, and basically most of your work has now been done already pretty much automatically. And once you turn on your screens, you will see that your screen is now running past everything. You can now go and tweak the heights of all of these things so that they are in alignment with your plan and elevation and section. And that pretty much shows you the process. So just before we start the next lesson, I will go in and finish some of these tiny details myself. Nothing will be new that I'm doing. It'll just be a continuation of everything that I've showed you in this lesson. So there we go. There is pretty much most of our building done. We're going to now focus on this part over here, which is the main master suite, and that we're going to be looking at in the next lesson, so hang on for that.